Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that, instead of bringing you joy, leaves you feeling drained, like you're carrying an invisible weight every single day? Maybe it's that friend who always shows up expecting you to save them, but is never there when you need them. Or perhaps it's someone from your own family, and that's where things get complicated because, of course, blood is thicker than water, right? But what happens when that blood drains your peace and consumes your energy? I'm Gabriel, and today I want to talk to you about something you might have felt but haven't always dared to confront: knowing when to say enough. In this video, I'm going to show you the clear signs that indicate it's time to walk away, even from the people you love the most. Because yes, it's hard, but protecting your peace isn't an act of selfishness. It's an act of wisdom. Stay with me, because understanding these signs can not only change how you navigate your relationships, but also give you the freedom and relief you deserve. And I promise you, the last point will be the most powerful, because it will force us to face a truth few dare to accept, but one that can transform your life forever. Number 1, when your inner peace pays the price. Sometimes the greatest cost of a relationship isn't measured in time or money, but in what you're willing to sacrifice to keep it. Inner peace, that sense of calm you've worked so hard to build, can silently crumble if you allow certain toxic dynamics to enter and stay in your life. And the hardest part? Those dynamics often don't come from strangers, but from people who once filled your life with love, or whom society has taught you that you can't leave behind. But at what cost? The Stoics taught us that the most valuable thing we can cultivate isn't wealth or reputation, but peace of mind. Seneca said, "No wind is favorable to the sailor who doesn't know where he's going." And it's true. How can you expect to move forward in life if you let constant conflicts, endless emotional demands, and unnecessary reproaches ruin your ability to enjoy the present? What you tolerate day after day becomes what defines your life. Science backs this up too. Studies on chronic stress have shown that negative relationships are one of the leading causes of emotional and physical exhaustion. If you're constantly on edge or feel a knot in your stomach every time you interact with someone, that's not normal. It's a sign that the relationship is directly impacting your health, from your blood pressure to the quality of your sleep. And the most dangerous part is that while you struggle to keep the peace with that person, you end up at war with yourself. But here's the big truth that many avoid facing. Walking away doesn't mean you don't love that person. It means you love yourself enough not to let their chaos drag you down. Stoicism doesn't ask you to isolate yourself. It asks you to set clear boundaries, to know the difference between what's within your control and what isn't. You can't change anyone, but you can decide what you allow and what you don't in your life. Think about this. How many times have you felt that, after a conversation, a visit, or even a text message, the peace you had just vanishes? That feeling is a reminder that something isn't right. Your inner peace shouldn't be negotiable, especially not with people who continually put it at risk. Keep this in mind as we move forward, because even though recognizing these signs can be uncomfortable, it's also the first step to taking back control of your life and freeing yourself from a weight that doesn't belong to you. In the next point, we'll talk about something even harder: how to identify when the harm outweighs the love, and what to do when that moment comes. Number 2, when the harm outweighs the love. Imagine Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, facing one of the hardest decisions of his life. It wasn't about the war against the barbarians or managing the vast Roman Empire, but something far more personal: his own son, Commodus. Marcus Aurelius, the man who preached temperance, justice, and self-discipline, was a father who deeply loved his family. But as the years went by, it became increasingly clear that Commodus did not share those values. His unchecked ambition, cruelty, and disregard for ethics made him a threat, not just to Rome, but to the very philosophy his father had tried to teach him. Marcus Aurelius knew that his love for his son was immense, but he also understood he couldn't let that love cloud his judgment. In his meditations, he reflected deeply on the importance of acting with virtue, even when the heart rebels. It wasn't an easy decision, but he ended up limiting Commodus's power during his lifetime, aware that the well-being of many had to take precedence over his own emotional bond. Although his control over his son was temporary and couldn't prevent the empire's later decline, his story leaves us with a clear lesson. Sometimes, even the purest love doesn't justify tolerating constant harm. In everyday life, many people face similar, though less epic, decisions. It could be an adult child who continually abuses their parents' patience with unreasonable demands, or perhaps a couple who, after years together, have lost mutual respect and kindness, leaving only a bond full of resentment and wounds. The love is there, but so is the harm, and the balance between the two can dangerously tip towards suffering. Modern neuroscience tells us that strong emotional connections, especially family ones, activate deep attachment circuits in our brain that make it incredibly difficult to walk away, even when we know we're being hurt. But this is where Stoicism comes in as a guide. Epictetus reminds us that we cannot control people or their actions, only our response to them. Loving someone doesn't mean enduring the unbearable. It means wishing them well, but not at the expense of your integrity. It's crucial to understand that letting go is not betrayal. Letting go is often a greater act of love toward the other person by allowing them to face the consequences of their actions, and toward yourself by choosing to protect your own emotional and physical well-being. Like Marcus Aurelius, sometimes we must prioritize the greater good, even if it means temporary pain. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, how many relationships are you holding on to because you're afraid of being seen as someone who abandons? Remember that walking away from harm doesn't mean abandoning love. It means making a conscious decision to protect what truly matters, your peace, your health, and your ability to give your best to those who also care for you. In the next lesson, we'll explore one of the most subtle and treacherous signs, one that often goes unnoticed but, once recognized, can completely change how you choose to approach your relationships. Number 3, when you're always the one who gives in. Have you ever stopped to count how many times in a week you say yes when you really wanted to say no? I have a practical exercise for you, a sort of emotional thermometer to measure the balance in your relationships. For the next 3 days, every time you interact with someone close to you, a friend, a child, your partner, write down in a notebook or on your phone how many times you agree to do something you didn't truly want to do, just to avoid conflict or out of fear of disappointing them. You don't need to change anything yet. Just observe and take notes. This exercise may seem simple, but it's deeply revealing. The Stoics, like Epictetus, insisted that our freedom lies in choosing our actions consciously, not reacting automatically to please others. When you constantly give in, you're not exercising your freedom. You're handing it over to the desires of others. The act of recording your decisions not only makes you aware of how much you're giving, but also how much of yourself you're losing in the process. Modern psychology backs this up. Studies on personal boundaries show that people who struggle to say no experience higher levels of stress and emotional fatigue, which directly impacts their physical health. Your body reacts when you feel you're betraying yourself to please others, and over time, that internal discomfort can turn into chronic illnesses or a constant sense of dissatisfaction. When you finish this exercise, ask yourself, what patterns do you see? Are there certain people you always give in to more than you should? Recognizing this isn't about blaming yourself, it's about empowering yourself. Because yes, saying no can feel uncomfortable at first, but it's one of the bravest acts of self-care you can practice. If you're enjoying this content and feel you're learning something new about your relationships and how to take better care of yourself, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Also, give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these reflections reach and how you're applying them in your life. Remember, it's not about stopping your help to others, it's about making sure you're also helping yourself. Balance isn't always easy to achieve, but it starts with the simple act of paying attention to your own needs. Because, in the end, the healthiest relationships are those where both sides can give and receive, without one person always carrying the load. Take a moment to reflect. How balanced are your relationships right now? Number 4, when you feel like you've lost yourself. A few weeks ago, I received a message from Beatrice, a 63-year-old viewer from Bogota. She told me she had found this channel while searching for answers. She had dedicated her entire life to her family, caring for her parents until their last days, supporting her children as they built their own paths, and after decades of marriage, she realized she no longer remembered who she was outside of those roles. Her voice, as she put it, had slowly faded away. "How do I even know what I want if everything I've done has been for others?" she asked me. Beatrice described a feeling that many people know all too well, looking in the mirror and not recognizing yourself as if the essence of who you are had been trapped by the demands of others. But what hurt her the most wasn't the sacrifice itself. It was realizing she no longer knew how to reclaim her place in her own life. Her story deeply resonated with me because it reflects a truth Epictetus constantly repeated. If you wish to improve, be prepared to appear foolish or selfish to others. In other words, taking back control of your life often means facing criticism or discomfort from those who benefit from your lack of boundaries. Beatrice started with a small act of courage. She told me that one day, after listening to a reflection on this channel, she decided to talk to her children. She explained how she felt and told them that although she loved them deeply, she needed time for herself. She signed up for a painting class, something she had always wanted to do but had postponed because, according to her, there were always more important things to take care of. In the process, she learned to say no without feeling guilty, to stop doing things out of obligation, and to reconnect with the passions she had left behind. Beatrice's transformation wasn't immediate or easy. At first, her children didn't understand why their mother, always available, was now setting boundaries. Even some close friends judged her, telling her that at her age, she should just accept things as they were. But she persisted, holding on to a phrase I shared in a previous video. It's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Little by little, she began to feel something she described as freedom. Not the kind that comes from leaving others behind, but the kind that comes from being present for herself. Beatrice's story teaches us that when we lose ourselves trying to satisfy others, we end up losing far more than we gain. Stoic philosophy reminds us that we cannot be truly useful to anyone if we aren't first useful to ourselves. And while society may criticize those who choose to take care of themselves and prioritize their well-being, the true act of love is staying true to our essence, because only from that place can we truly love others better. So think about this. Are there parts of your life you've completely abandoned in the name of others? Maybe it's time to look inward and ask yourself, what do you need to feel like yourself again? Because as Beatrice told me at the end of her message, when you find yourself, there's no going back, and that's something wonderful. Number 5, when forgiveness becomes repetitive and empty. There comes a point in certain relationships where forgiveness stops being a balm for the soul and turns into a chain that keeps you tied to pain. Too often, we confuse forgiveness with the obligation to tolerate, as if accepting empty apologies or downplaying the harm done to us somehow makes us noble. But the truth is, forgiveness without real change can become a destructive cycle that wears down both your heart and mind. Think about this. How many times have you heard, "I'm sorry, it won't happen again," only to see the same story repeat itself over and over? Maybe it's a friend who promises to respect your boundaries but keeps taking advantage of your time, or a family member who hurts you with cruel words and then claims, "I didn't really mean it." The problem isn't in the act of forgiving, but in what we allow afterward. As the German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, "We easily forgive those who hurt us, but not those who offend us." The difference lies in how we process that pain. If we let it go without learning from it, we're only offending ourselves. Stoicism teaches us to act with compassion toward others, but also with justice toward ourselves. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this in his Meditations, reminding us to treat others with patience, but never at the expense of our own dignity. True forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone to keep hurting us. It means letting go of resentment, while also setting the necessary boundaries to protect ourselves. From a psychological standpoint, studies on toxic relationships have shown that repeating harmful patterns within a relationship can damage our self-esteem and lead to what some experts call emotional fatigue. This happens when you feel trapped in a cycle where your emotions are ignored or manipulated, and you find yourself constantly forgiving without ever seeing genuine change. Science supports what the Stoics intuitively understood. Forgiveness is valuable, but only if it doesn't require sacrificing yourself in the process. So what can you do if you find yourself in this situation? The answer isn't simple, but it starts with one profound question. What are you willing to tolerate? Forgiving doesn't mean accepting a toxic dynamic. You can release the weight of resentment while also deciding you no longer want to remain in a relationship that takes more from you than it gives. This might mean distancing yourself temporarily or even cutting ties, not out of hatred, but from a place of caring for your own health and well-being. An example that illustrates this idea is a woman named Emily, who wrote to me some time ago to share how, after 40 years of marriage, she finally realized that her constant forgiveness toward her husband wasn't leading to any real change. Her husband would apologize, promise to improve, but the same patterns of disrespect and lack of consideration kept repeating over and over. It took Emily years to understand that her forgiveness, though offered with love, was not accompanied by the transformation necessary to heal the relationship. Finally, with pain, but also with clarity, she chose to end the relationship. She did it without hatred, but with the peace that comes from knowing she was choosing her own well-being without letting resentment consume her. Think about it. How many times have you offered forgiveness in situations that only perpetuate a cycle of harm? Is the forgiveness you're giving a bridge toward peace, or just an excuse for others to keep hurting you? Remember, letting go doesn't mean failing. It means choosing yourself, something that should never feel like a selfish act. The most powerful forgiveness isn't always the one we give to others, but the one we give ourselves when we decide we deserve something better. Number 6. When confusing family with obligation hurts you. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting at a round table. In front of you are 10 chairs occupied by the most important people in your life. Children, siblings, close friends, maybe a grandchild, or even neighbors you consider family. At first, everything seems calm, but little by little, you realize some of them start asking you for things. One needs your time, another demands your energy, someone else insists on your help to solve problems that never seem to end. And there you are, fulfilling every request because you believe that's what's expected of you. Now imagine that in the middle of all that chaos, you disappear from the table. The chairs are still occupied, the voices continue, but your empty seat goes unnoticed. Sound familiar? This fictional scenario reflects what happens when we confuse love for our family with the obligation to always give, even at our own expense. We often think that being there for others, no matter the cost, is the ultimate proof of how much we love them. But the truth is, love that demands you destroy yourself can never be healthy, neither for you nor for them. Stoicism teaches us that we are not responsible for carrying the world on our shoulders, not even for those we love most. Epictetus said, "First learn who you are, and then adorn your life accordingly." In other words, you cannot be a solid support for others if you don't first know who you are or what you need to stay in balance. When we constantly sacrifice our own needs in the name of family, we lose the chance to be the best version of ourselves. What we give, instead of being a genuine act of love, becomes a draining obligation that benefits no one. From a psychological perspective, this is related to something called caregiver burnout. It's a common phenomenon among those who feel responsible for the well-being of others, especially as they age. This burnout doesn't just affect the body, it also affects the mind, leaving you feeling empty and purposeless. If you've ever felt like you give so much that there's nothing left for yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's go back to the table. Now, I want you to picture yourself taking your empty chair and sitting back down, but this time with a new perspective. You start setting boundaries. Not to push others away, but to create a healthier relationship where what you give doesn't come from obligation, but from love and balance. Others may resist at first, maybe because they're used to receiving without thinking about what you need. But gradually, they'll come to understand that to remain a strong and loving presence, you also need to care for yourself. Taking your place back at the table is not a rejection of your family, it's a declaration of your worth. Stoic philosophy reminds us that we can only give what we have. If you're empty, what's left for others? True love is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how genuine and fulfilling your presence is. Take a moment to reflect. If you were to disappear from that table permanently, what emotional legacy would you want to leave for those around you? A version of yourself that's exhausted and resentful, or a person who knew how to care for themselves so they could love from a place of abundance? In life, it's not about how much you give, but how you give. And that difference can change everything. Number 6, when confusing family with obligation hurts you. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting at a round table. In front of you are 10 chairs occupied by the most important people in your life: children, siblings, close friends, maybe a grandchild, or even neighbors you consider family. At first, everything seems calm, but little by little, you realize some of them start asking you for things. One needs your time, another demands your energy, someone else insists on your help to solve problems that never seem to end. And there you are, fulfilling every request because you believe that's what's expected of you. Now imagine that in the middle of all that chaos, you disappear from the table. The chairs are still occupied, the voices continue, but your empty seat goes unnoticed. Sound familiar? This fictional scenario reflects what happens when we confuse love for our family with the obligation to always give, even at our own expense. We often think that being there for others, no matter the cost, is the ultimate proof of how much we love them. But the truth is, love that demands you destroy yourself can never be healthy, neither for you nor for them. Stoicism teaches us that we are not responsible for carrying the world on our shoulders, not even for those we love most. Epictetus said, "First learn who you are, and then adorn your life accordingly." In other words, you cannot be a solid support for others if you don't first know who you are or what you need to stay in balance. When we constantly sacrifice our own needs in the name of family, we lose the chance to be the best version of ourselves. What we give, instead of being a genuine act of love, becomes a draining obligation that benefits no one. From a psychological perspective, this is related to something called caregiver burnout. It's a common phenomenon among those who feel responsible for the well-being of others, especially as they age. This burnout doesn't just affect the body, it also affects the mind, leaving you feeling empty and purposeless. If you've ever felt like you give so much that there's nothing left for yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's go back to the table. Now I want you to picture yourself taking your empty chair and sitting back down, but this time with a new perspective. You start setting boundaries, not to push others away, but to create a healthier relationship where what you give doesn't come from obligation, but from love and balance. Others may resist at first, maybe because they're used to receiving without thinking about what you need. But gradually, they'll come to understand that to remain a strong and loving presence, you also need to care for yourself. Taking your place back at the table is not a rejection of your family, it's a declaration of your worth. Stoic philosophy reminds us that we can only give what we have. If you're empty, what's left for others? True love is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how genuine and fulfilling your presence is. Take a moment to reflect. If you were to disappear from that table permanently, what emotional legacy would you want to leave for those around you? A version of yourself that's exhausted and resentful, or a person who knew how to care for themselves so they could love from a place of abundance? In life, it's not about how much you give, but how you give, and that difference can change everything. We've reached the end of this journey, and I want to thank you for staying with me until now. This isn't just a video. It's a conversation about honoring your life, your emotions, and the worth you have as a person. Every lesson in this content is designed to help you remember something essential. You are not here to carry what drains you, but to nurture what fills you with peace and purpose. If you've made it this far, it means you're serious about taking care of your well-being and the quality of your relationships. That deserves recognition because taking this step is not always easy. I invite you to share in the comments the phrase, "I am Stoic," and tell me where you're watching this video from. I love seeing how far these reflections reach and how they impact those in this community. If you feel this content could be helpful to someone close to you, don't hesitate to share it. Sometimes a message like this arrives just when someone needs it most, and you could be the person who inspires them to reflect or take that first step toward change. My name is Gabriel, and in this space, we talk about how to live with more awareness, serenity, and inner strength. If you haven't done so yet, I invite you to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming topics we have prepared. Here, we'll keep sharing wisdom that I hope helps you live this stage of your life with fullness and dignity. Thank you for allowing me to accompany you on this journey. Remember, you always have the power to choose what's best for you, even when those decisions are difficult. Until next time, and in the meantime, keep choosing to take care of yourself and live in peace.